My wife mocked my simple suit at her sister's wedding, called me an embarrassment in front of everyone. Then the groom's father saw my cufflinks, went pale, and whispered, "Those are custom Vanderbilt." Who is he? She had no idea who she'd married. My name is Preston Kingsley. I'm 56 years old, and until recently, I thought I had things figured out. I'd built a career most men only dream about. For nearly 3 decades, I specialized in risk management for some of the world's largest hedge funds. Bridgewater Associates, Renaissance Technologies, 2 Sigma. If you don't recognize those names, let me put it simply, these are the firms that move markets. When they sneeze, entire economies catch cold. And when they miscalculate, that's where I came in. I made my reputation during the 2008 financial crisis. While everyone else was running around like chickens with their heads cut off, I was the one quietly pointing out which derivatives were about to implode and which credit default swaps were ticking time bombs. I didn't save the world, but I saved a few fortunes. Big ones. The kind of money that makes people remember your name, even if they never say it out loud. Then, about 8 years ago, I walked away, took my consulting fees, invested wisely, and disappeared into what my wife liked to call early retirement. I was 48, she was 40, and our son Bennett had just graduated from Princeton. Life was supposed to be simple after that. Quiet dinners, occasional travel, maybe some volunteer work. That's what I told myself, anyway. But my wife, Simone, she had different ideas. She'd spent our entire marriage as the wife of Preston Kingsley, the consultant, and she'd gotten used to a certain lifestyle. The problem was, she never really understood what I did. To her, I was just a guy who wore unremarkable suits and worked too much. She liked the money, but resented the man who earned it. And when I retired, when I stopped flying to London and Zurich and Tokyo, when I became just another husband at home, she started looking at me differently. Not with love, with disappointment. Her sister's wedding was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became the moment everything changed. Not because of what happened that night, but because of what finally became visible. Sometimes the truth doesn't hit you all at once. Sometimes it seeps in slowly, like water through a fracture in the walls. And by the time you notice, the whole structure is ready to collapse. I wore a simple navy suit that evening. Nothing fancy, just a well-tailored piece I'd had made 15 years ago in Geneva. It still fit perfectly, still looked sharp. But to Simone, standing there in her designer gown that cost more than most people's monthly rent, it was an embarrassment. Couldn't afford something better, she said, loud enough for 3 nearby guests to hear. I didn't answer, just slipped my hands into my pockets and watched her walk away, already hunting for someone more interesting to talk to. That's when I knew. The foundation hadn't just developed a crack. It had already collapsed. I just hadn't been paying attention. The reception hall was one of those places designed to make you feel small. Vaulted ceilings, crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than a decent car, and enough marble to build a Roman temple. Simone's sister had married into the Whitfield family, which meant old Boston money, the kind that doesn't talk about itself because it doesn't need to. Everyone there knew everyone else, or at least pretended to. I recognized a few faces from the financial world, senior partners at firms I'd consulted for, board members who'd sat across from me during crisis meetings they'd rather forget. I found a quiet spot near the terrace, away from the noise. The May air was cool, and I could hear the string quartet murdering another classical piece inside. I wasn't hiding. I just didn't see the point of standing around, making small talk with people who'd forget my name by tomorrow. That's when Richard Whitfield found me. The groom's father. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that comes from 4 decades of running a private equity firm that managed $12 billion in assets. I never met him personally, but I knew the firm. Everyone in my world did. He walked toward me holding a scotch, his eyes scanning the crowd like he was evaluating a portfolio. Then his gaze landed on me, more specifically, on my wrist as I adjusted my cuff. He stopped mid-stride. His expression shifted from casual to focused in less than a second. I watched his jaw tighten, his eyes narrow. Then he moved closer, not aggressively, just deliberately. "Excuse me," Richard said, his voice careful. "Those cufflinks." I glanced down at them. Simple platinum settings, understated design. Nothing flashy. To most people, they'd look like something you could pick up at any decent jeweler. But they weren't. "Gift," I said simply. "From whom?" His tone had shifted. This wasn't small talk anymore. An old colleague. Zurich, 2006. Richard's face went pale. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. He set his scotch down on a nearby table and leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Those are custom Vanderbilt, he said quietly. I've only seen one other pair in my life. Geneva, at a private meeting during the subprime crisis. The man wearing them kept Morgan Stanley from imploding. I didn't respond, just met his eyes and let the silence do the talking. Richard straightened up, his expression now a mixture of respect and something close to alarm. He glanced back toward the reception hall, then at me again. Who is he? I heard him mutter under his breath, more to himself than to me. Then he did something I didn't expect. He excused himself, walked directly to his son, the groom, and pulled him aside. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I saw Richard lean in close, gesturing subtly in my direction. The groom's expression changed from confused to attentive. They talked for maybe 20 seconds before Richard released him and headed toward another group of guests, this time with purpose. I stayed where I was, watching the ripple effect begin. Richard spoke to a man I recognized as the CFO of a Boston-based investment bank. That man glanced my way, paused mid-conversation, and said something to the person next to him. Within 10 minutes, there were at least 6 people stealing looks in my direction. Simone was still inside, laughing with her sister and a group of women who all looked like they shopped at the same boutiques and vacationed in the same places. She hadn't noticed the shift yet, hadn't seen her husband become the center of quiet, careful attention from people who actually mattered. But she would, because in rooms like this, power doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It moves like a current beneath the surface, invisible until it's already changed everything. And I'd just become that current. Not because I'd done anything, just because someone finally recognized what I'd been all along. The shift in the room was subtle but unmistakable. I'd seen it before, in boardrooms and conference halls, when someone realizes they've miscalculated who holds the power. It starts with glances, then whispers, then a careful recalibration of social positions. Within 20 minutes of Richard Whitfield's recognition, I'd gone from invisible to unavoidable. A man approached me first. Late 50s, expensive suit that actually fit properly, the kind of confidence that comes from managing other people's billions. I recognized him immediately. David Fletcher, senior partner at Blackstone. We'd crossed paths during the 2011 European debt crisis, though he probably didn't remember. I'd been the one who told his team which sovereign bonds would survive and which would implode. They'd listened, made a fortune. Preston Kingsley, Fletcher said, extending his hand. Not a question, a statement. I shook it. David, I thought you disappeared after Geneva, he said, keeping his voice low. Heard you went completely off the grid. I did. So what brings you here? Don't tell me you're related to the Whitfields. My wife's sister married into the family, I said simply. Fletcher's eyebrows went up. Your wife. He glanced across the room where Simone was holding court, her laugh carrying over the ambient noise. Does she know? Know what? Who you are? What you did? I sipped my water. She knows I used to consult. That's about it. Fletcher looked at me like I just told him I own a bridge in Brooklyn. You're serious? She never asked for details. Jesus. He shook his head slowly. Preston, you saved Renaissance Technologies from a complete meltdown in 2008. You identified the derivative exposure that would have bankrupted them before anyone else even saw it coming. Jim Simons himself told me you were the smartest risk analyst he'd ever worked with. That was a long time ago. Not that long. And people remember. Hell, I remember. You called the subprime collapse 6 months before it happened. 6 months. Do you have any idea how many people made fortunes because of your analysis? I didn't respond. The truth was, I knew exactly how many. I kept track for a while, back when I still cared about legacy. But legacies are funny things. They matter right up until they don't. And when I walked away, I decided mine didn't matter anymore. Fletcher glanced toward Richard Whitfield, who was now talking to 2 other men I vaguely recognized. Richard's telling everyone who'll listen. By the end of the night, half this room will know your name. Let them know. Your wife, too. Especially her. Fletcher studied me for a moment, then smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who'd just watched a poker hand play out and realized they'd been betting against the wrong player all along. This is going to be interesting, he said. Another guest approached. Then another. Suddenly, I wasn't the quiet man in the corner anymore. I was the center of a small but growing circle, fielding questions I mostly deflected, accepting compliments I didn't need. Through it all, I kept one eye on Simone. She'd noticed. Finally, I saw her freeze mid-sentence, her eyes finding me across the room. Not just me. The men surrounding me. Important men. Men whose names she'd spent years trying to drop at dinner parties. And there they were, standing around her husband like he was someone worth their time. Her expression shifted from confusion to something sharper. Not quite recognition. Not yet. But close. She excused herself from her group and started walking toward me, her heels clicking against the marble floor with purpose. This was going to be interesting indeed. Simone cut through the small crowd around me like she owned the space. Which, in her mind, she probably did. She'd spent 28 years as my wife, perfecting the art of seeming important by proximity. Now, she was about to discover proximity worked both ways. "Preston," she said, her voice bright but strained. "I didn't realize you knew so many people here." David Fletcher smiled politely and stepped back slightly, giving her room but not leaving. The others did the same. A respectful retreat that was really just strategic positioning. "They want to see this." "I don't," I said. "They know me." Her smile tightened. "I see." She glanced at Fletcher, then at the others. "I'm Simone, Preston's wife. We've met," Fletcher said smoothly, "at the Blackstone Charity Gala 3 years ago. You were on the planning committee." "Oh yes," Simone said, though I could tell she didn't remember him at all. "How nice to see you again." Fletcher nodded, but said nothing else. The silence stretched just long enough to be uncomfortable. Simone turned to me, lowering her voice. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" "Of course." She led me toward a quieter corner near the terrace doors, out of earshot, but still visible to the crowd. When she turned to face me, her expression had shifted from bright to brittle. "What's going on?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb, Preston. Why are all these people suddenly interested in you?" "They recognize me." "From what?" I let the question hang there for a moment. Not to be cruel, just to see if she'd actually figure it out on her own. She hadn't. "From my work," I said finally. "Your work?" She said it like I just claimed to be an astronaut. "Preston, you consulted for some boring financial firms 20 years ago. Nobody remembers that. Some people do." "Who?" "David Fletcher. He manages money." "So what?" "He manages $200 billion, I said quietly. "And in 2011, I helped his team avoid a 30% loss during the European debt crisis." "He remembers." Simone blinked. "You never told me that. You never asked." Her jaw tightened. "Don't give me that. You made it sound like you pushed papers around and occasionally gave advice nobody listened to." "I gave advice people listened to," I corrected. "They just didn't talk about it publicly. That was the point." "The point of what?" "Discretion." She stared at me like I was speaking another language. Which in a way I was. Simone's world was loud, visible, full of people who needed everyone to know how important they were. Mine had been the opposite. Silent. Invisible. Effective. "Richard Whitfield told his son you saved Morgan Stanley," she said suddenly. "Is that true?" "I didn't save them. I identified the exposure that would have destroyed them and suggested how to mitigate it. They did the rest." "When?" 2008. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I did tell you. I told you I was consulting on risk management for major financial institutions." "You said it sounded boring." She flinched. Just slightly, but I saw it. Because she had said that. Multiple times. Usually while planning some charity event or shopping trip that require my credit card but not my presence. "Preston," she said slowly, "how much money do you have?" There was. The only question that really mattered to her. Not what I'd accomplished. Not who I'd helped. Just a number. "Enough," I said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." Her face flushed. "I'm your wife. I have a right to know." "You're my wife," I agreed. "And for 28 years, you've had access to everything we own. Joint accounts, shared assets, full transparency. You never asked about the details because you didn't care. Now you care. Why? Because people are looking at you differently. And that bothers you." "It confuses me." "No," I said. "It embarrasses you. Because for 28 years, you've treated me like I was lucky to have you. Like you were the star, and I was just the guy who paid the bills. And now you're realizing you might have miscalculated." She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Behind us, I could hear the reception continuing, the music and laughter and careful social choreography. But in our little corner, everything had gone very, very quiet. "We'll talk about this at home," she finally said. "No," I replied. "We won't." The terrace was quieter, but not empty. A few guests had escaped the reception for fresh air and hushed conversations. I found a spot near the railing, looking out over the manicured gardens that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. The May evening was cooling down, and I could hear the faint sound of the string quartet through the open doors behind me. I wasn't alone for long. "Dad." I turned. Bennett stood a few feet away, his expression caught somewhere between confusion and something I couldn't quite read. "My son, 27 years old, Princeton graduate, now working as an analyst at Goldman Sachs. Smart kid, driven. He'd inherited his mother's ambition, but I'd always hoped my patience." "Bennett," I said, "enjoying the wedding?" "Not really." He moved closer, leaning against the railing next to me. "Dad, what's going on? You'll have to be more specific." "Richard Whitfield just pulled me aside. He said I should be proud to have you as a father. Said you're one of the most brilliant risk analysts of your generation." Bennett paused. Then he asked if I knew you'd saved Renaissance Technologies from collapse in 2008. I didn't respond immediately. Just watched a couple walking through the gardens below, completely unaware of the conversations happening above them. "Did you?" Bennett pressed. "Save Renaissance. I identified a problem they hadn't seen yet. They fixed it themselves." "That's not what Richard said. He said Jim Simons personally credited you with preventing a complete meltdown. Said your analysis of their derivative exposure was the most thorough risk assessment he'd ever seen." "Richard talks too much." "Dad." Bennett's voice had an edge to it now. Not anger. Frustration. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Tell you what?" "That you weren't just some consultant who worked for boring financial firms. Mom always made it sound like you pushed papers and attended meetings nobody cared about. She said you retired early because you were burned out and the work wasn't that important anyway." "Your mother said a lot of things." Bennett turned to face me fully. "I work at Goldman Sachs. Do you know what people there would give to have your reputation? I mentioned your name to my managing director last month, just in passing. He asked if I was related to Preston Kingsley, who consulted during the subprime crisis. I said I didn't know." "I didn't know, Dad. Because you never told me." "Would it have changed anything?" "Yes. Hell yes, it would have changed things. I spent my entire life thinking you were just comfortable. Successful enough to retire early, but not remarkable. And now I'm finding out you were the guy behind some of the biggest crisis management decisions in modern finance." I was one of many voices. "Stop doing that," Bennett said sharply. "Stop minimizing it. David Fletcher told me you called the subprime collapse 6 months before anyone else. He said you identified the exact mechanisms that would trigger the cascade. You probably saved the entire global financial system from something even worse." "That's dramatic." Is it really?" Bennett ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd picked up from me. "Dad, I've been working in finance for 3 years now. I know what risk analysis looks like. I know how rare it is to find someone who can see patterns nobody else sees. And you were that person. You were that person, and you never told me. You never asked. Because Mom told me not to. She said you didn't like talking about your work. Said it made you uncomfortable. She made it sound like you'd failed at something and retired to avoid facing it." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not surprise. I'd suspected Simone had shaped Bennett's perception of me, but hearing it confirmed was different. Hearing my son say it out loud made it real. "Your mother," I said carefully, "has her own version of events. It's not necessarily accurate, but it's what she needs to believe." "Why would she need to believe you were a failure?" "Because the alternative is more threatening." Bennett stared at me. "What alternative?" "That I was successful, respected, important in ways she couldn't control or take credit for. Your mother needs to be the center of attention, Bennett. She always has. Having a husband who was quietly influential didn't fit her narrative. So she rewrote it." "That's..." Bennett trailed off, looking back toward the reception hall. Through the glass doors, I could see Simone talking to a group of women, her gestures animated, her smile bright. "That's messed up. It's what it is." "Did she even know?" "About what you really did." "She knew what I told her. She chose not to ask for more details because she didn't want them. Details would have complicated her story." Bennett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised me. "I'm sorry, Dad." "For what?" "For not asking." for believing her version instead of finding out the truth myself. I'm 27 years old. I should have been smarter than that. You believed your mother. That's not a character flaw. Maybe not. But it was stupid. He paused. Is that why you're here tonight? To let people see the truth. I'm here because your mother insisted. The rest just happened. But you wore those cufflinks. I glanced down at them. I did. And you knew someone would recognize them. I suspected. Bennett smiled just slightly. You wanted this to happen. Maybe I did. I admitted. Or maybe I just got tired of being invisible. Bennett and I stood there in silence for a moment. The noise from the reception, a distant hum. Then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. Dad, when I got the interview at Goldman Sachs 3 years ago, did you have anything to do with that? I'd known this conversation was coming eventually. Probably should have happened sooner. But timing is everything, and this seemed like the right moment for truth. Define anything, I said. Don't dodge. Did you make a phone call? Pull some string I didn't know about. I made a phone call. Bennett's expression shifted. To who? Lloyd Blankfein's office. He wasn't CEO anymore, but he was still on the board. We'd worked together during the 2008 crisis. I asked him to make sure your resume got a fair look. That's all. That's all. Dad, that's everything. Do you know how many people apply to Goldman every year? About 300,000. Less than 1% get offers. Exactly. And I got one because you made a phone call. No, I said firmly. You got one because you had a degree from Princeton, a 3.8 GPA, and 3 internships that showed you knew what you were doing. My phone call got your resume to the right desk. You earned everything after that. But I wouldn't have had the chance without you. Maybe not. Or maybe you would have gotten there another way. You're smart, Bennett. Driven. You don't need me to succeed. He leaned back against the railing, processing. Does Mom know? No. Why not? Because she would have taken credit for it somehow. Would have found a way to make it about her connections, her influence, her perfect son who succeeded because of her guidance. I didn't want that narrative attached to your career. So you just never said anything. I never said anything. Bennett shook his head slowly. That's incredibly selfless or incredibly manipulative. I can't decide which. Can it be both? He laughed, short and sharp. Yeah, I guess it can. He paused. Is there anything else? Any other parts of my life you've quietly influenced? I considered lying. Would have been easier. But we'd crossed the line tonight, and there was no going back. Your MBA at Wharton, I said. His eyes widened. What about it? The full scholarship you got. The one that covered tuition and living expenses for 2 years. That was from the Wharton Alumni Foundation. They told me I was selected based on merit, and he stopped. Dad, tell me you didn't. I didn't create the scholarship. It already existed. But I made a donation to the foundation 5 years ago. $2.3 million. Enough to endow a full scholarship in perpetuity. I suggested they might want to prioritize candidates with specific qualifications. Qualifications you happen to have. $2.3 million. Bennett said it like he was testing the words. You gave them $2.3 million. I did. And Mom doesn't know about that either. Your mother thinks your education was paid for by a combination of my savings and student loans you'll be paying off for the next 20 years. She never asked for details because she assumed I couldn't afford better. Jesus Christ. Bennett turned away, staring out at the gardens. Does she know anything true about you? She knows I love you. That part's true. But everything else is complicated. Bennett was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I thought the conversation might be over. Then he said, very quietly, thank you. For what? For the phone call. For the scholarship. For caring about my career, even when you knew I'd never know you were helping. He turned back to face me. But Dad, from now on, can you just tell me the truth? No more quiet intervention. No more hiding who you are or what you're doing. I'm an adult. I can handle it. Can you? I'm going to have to, aren't I? Because after tonight, everyone's going to know. And they're going to have questions. They are. And Mom. Your mother, I said carefully, is going to have a lot of questions. Most of which she won't like the answers to. Bennett nodded slowly. Then he did something unexpected. He reached out and gripped my shoulder, firm and sure. I'm on your side, he said. Whatever happens next, I'm on your side. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just nodded. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something close to hope. The reception had shifted into that phase where the alcohol was flowing freely and people's filters were starting to fail. I'd returned inside with Bennett, both of us quiet after our conversation. But the moment we stepped through the terrace doors, I felt the change in the room. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Simone. She was standing near the dessert table with 3 women I recognized as her regular social circle. Her sister, the bride, had moved on to other guests. The women around Simone were listening to her talk, but their expressions had changed. Not engaged, not impressed, just polite. The kind of polite that meant they were already planning their exit. David Fletcher intercepted me before I could move further into the room. "Preston, you have a minute?" "Of course." He led me to a quieter corner, his expression more serious than before. "I need to tell you something. It's about Simone." I waited. "She's been telling people she's the primary reason for your success. Said you struggled with anxiety and self-doubt, and she was the one who kept you grounded. Made it sound like you would have fallen apart without her constant support." She said this tonight, about 30 minutes ago, to Jennifer Caldwell, whose husband runs Wellington Management. Jennifer mentioned you'd consulted for them in 2009. Simone jumped in with her version before anyone could ask you about it directly. I absorbed this information without reaction. It wasn't surprising. Simone had been rewriting history for years. But doing it here, tonight, in front of people who actually knew what I'd done, that was bold. Or desperate. Probably both. "What did Jennifer say?" I asked. "Nothing at first. Then she excused herself and told her husband." "Who told me?" "Preston, Wellington Management's records show you single-handedly identified a portfolio vulnerability that saved them $400 million. There's documentation, emails, meeting notes with your analysis." Jennifer's husband pulled up some of the files on his phone just to confirm. And now people are comparing Simone's story to reality. It's not going well for her. I glanced across the room. Simone had moved to another group, her gestures animated, her voice carrying. She was working hard. Too hard. Overcompensating. "There's more," Fletcher continued. "Someone asked about Bennett, about how he got into Goldman. Simone said it was entirely her connections, that she called in favors with friends on the board. She doesn't have friends on the board. We know that. But she doesn't know we know. Preston, she's been building a narrative about herself for years, and it's all coming apart tonight. People are fact-checking her in real time." Bennett appeared beside us. "Dad, I need to talk to you." "What happened?" "Mom just told Mrs. Whitfield that she was the one who funded my Wharton education. Said she'd saved carefully for years and made sacrifices so I could have opportunities you couldn't provide." Fletcher's eyebrows rose. "That's a bold claim." "It's a false claim," I said quietly. "And Mrs. Whitfield probably knows it." "She does," Bennett confirmed. "Her husband is on Wharton's development board. He checked the scholarship records on his phone. Saw your donation. Saw your name on the endowment." "How did Simone react when she found out?" I asked. "She doesn't know yet. Mrs. Whitfield didn't confront her. Just excused herself. But Dad, people are talking. Really talking. And not in Mom's favor." I looked across the room again. Simone was still performing, still trying to control the narrative. But the audience had changed. They weren't buying it anymore. "Should I say something?" Bennett asked. "Should I tell her to stop?" "No," I said. "Let her finish." "Dad." "Bennett, your mother has spent 28 years building a version of reality that puts her at the center of every success. Tonight is the first time that version is being tested against facts. Let her see what happens when stories meet evidence." Fletcher was watching me carefully. "You're not going to step in." "Why would I? She made her choices. Now she gets to live with the consequences." "That's cold, Preston." "No, it's fair." I left them standing there and walked toward the bar. Not for alcohol, just for space. But I didn't make it 3 steps before Richard Whitfield intercepted me. "Preston," he said, his voice low, "we need to talk about the foundation." "What foundation?" "The one your wife claims to run. The Brighton Children's Foundation. She's been telling people she's the executive director, that she built it from nothing." "She's on the board," I said. "She's not the executive director." "I know. I sit on the advisory committee. We had a meeting last month. She attended for 20 minutes, contributed nothing, then left early to make a spa appointment." "That sounds right." "Preston, the foundation receives an anonymous donation of $500,000 every year. Has for the past 8 years. That's you, isn't it?" I didn't answer. "It is you," Richard said. "And she doesn't know. She's been taking credit for the foundation's growth and success. telling people she's personally responsible for its expansion. But the entire operating budget comes from your money. The foundation does good work, I said. That's what matters. Agreed. But she's building her reputation on work she's not actually doing. And tonight, people are figuring that out. The reception was winding down, but the damage was accelerating. I watched from my position near the bar as Simone moved from group to group, each conversation shorter than the last. People were being polite, but the warmth was gone, replaced by something else. Not hostility, just distance. Bennett rejoined me, his expression troubled. Dad, this is getting bad. I know. Shouldn't you do something? Like what? I don't know. Say something. Tell people to back off. Defend her. Defend her from what? The truth. Bennett flinched. She's still my mother. Yes. And she's still my wife. That doesn't mean I need to protect her from consequences she created herself. We watched as Jennifer Caldwell approached Simone. The conversation was brief. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Simone's expression shift from confident to defensive. Jennifer said something else, her tone firm but not cruel, and then walked away. Simone stood there for a moment, alone in the middle of a crowded room. Then she looked around, really looked, and for the first time tonight, I saw her understand what was happening. The smiles were thinner, the greetings briefer. People were avoiding eye contact, finding excuses to move elsewhere. She was being iced out, slowly, carefully, but unmistakably. Her eyes found me across the room, not with anger, with panic. She walked toward me quickly, her heels clicking on the marble floor. When she reached me, her voice was tight. We're leaving. Now. The reception isn't over. I don't care. We're leaving. You go ahead. I'll find my own way home. Her eyes widened. Excuse me. I said you can leave. I'm staying. Preston, people are saying things. Horrible things. About me. Are they saying things that aren't true? She opened her mouth, then closed it. You're enjoying this. No. I'm observing it. There's a difference. This is your fault. You told people things. You made me look bad. Simone, I haven't said a word about you all night. Not one word. Everything people are learning, they're learning because you told stories that didn't hold up under scrutiny. That's not fair, isn't it? You told Jennifer Caldwell I struggled with anxiety and needed your support. Jennifer's husband has emails from me from 2009 showing detailed analysis and strategic recommendations. No anxiety, no hesitation, just work. You told Mrs. Whitfield you funded Bennett's education. Her husband sits on Wharton's development board. He knows exactly who paid for it. You've been rewriting history for years, and tonight it finally caught up to you. Tears formed in her eyes. Real ones, I thought, or maybe just strategic ones. Hard to tell anymore. Why are you doing this? She asked. I'm not doing anything. You did this yourself. By coming here, by wearing those stupid cufflinks, by being who I've always been. The problem isn't that people are learning the truth about me, Simone. The problem is they're learning the truth about you. She slapped me. Not hard, but sharp enough that several nearby guests turned to look. The room went quieter. Not silent, but noticeably hushed. I didn't react. Just stood there, feeling the sting on my cheek, watching her realize what she'd just done. Bennett moved closer. Mom, don't, she said, her voice breaking. Don't you dare take a side. I'm not taking sides. I'm asking you to stop. Stop what? Defending myself. Protecting my reputation. You don't have a reputation to protect anymore, I said quietly. Not after tonight. Her face went pale. What are you saying? I'm saying you built your entire identity on being someone you're not. And now everyone knows. You can keep fighting it, keep trying to salvage the story. Or you can accept reality and figure out who you actually want to be going forward. I want to be your wife. No, you want to be the wife of someone important. You want the status, the access, the reflected glory. You never wanted me. You wanted what I could give you. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you asked me how I was feeling? When was the last time you cared about my thoughts, my concerns, my life separate from what I could provide for you? She had no answer. Just tears streaming down her face, mascara running. The perfect image she'd spent hours constructing falling apart in real time. I'm going to the hotel, she said finally. You can do whatever you want. She turned and walked away. Bennett started to follow, but I caught his arm. Let her go, I said. Dad, she's falling apart. I know, But sometimes people need to fall apart before they can rebuild themselves into something honest. Bennett looked at me, his expression torn. You really don't care, do you? I care. But I stopped trying to save her from herself a long time ago. Tonight, she chose to perform instead of being real. Now she gets to live with what that cost her. We watched Simone disappear through the main doors, alone. Several guests noticed. A few whispered. Most just returned to their conversations, already moving on. Richard Whitfield approached. Preston, I'm sorry about all this. Don't be. You didn't do anything wrong. Still, this wasn't how the evening was supposed to go. No, I agreed. It went exactly how it needed to. I didn't go home that night. Richard Whitfield offered me a guest room in their estate, and I accepted. No point driving back to a house where Simone would be waiting with either tears or accusations. Probably both. I needed space to think, and their guest suite provided that. Quiet, clean, anonymous. Bennett stayed too, taking the room next to mine. We didn't talk much. Just a brief goodnight, and the understanding that tomorrow would bring complications neither of us wanted to face yet. Morning came with weak sunlight through expensive curtains. I found Bennett in the breakfast room, staring at his phone with an expression that told me everything I needed to know before he said a word. Mom's been calling, he said, 17 times since 6 this morning. Have you answered? No. I don't know what to say to her. Then don't say anything yet. He looked up at me. Dad, we can't just ignore her forever. We're not ignoring her forever. We're giving her time to process what happened, and giving ourselves time to figure out what comes next. What does come next? I pour myself coffee from the sideboard. That depends on what your mother decides. She can accept reality and work on becoming someone authentic. Or she can double down on the victim narrative and blame everyone else for her embarrassment. You think she'll choose the victim narrative? I think she's been choosing it for 28 years. Why would tonight change that? Bennett set his phone down. I got a message from Mom's sister, the bride. She wants to talk to me. About whether I knew. About your past. About the money. About all of it. She's asking if I was in on some kind of conspiracy to humiliate Mom. What did you tell her? Nothing yet. But Dad, this is getting ugly. People are taking sides. Mom's family thinks you planned this whole thing. That you wore those cufflinks specifically to expose her. I wore the cufflinks because they matched my suit. Everything else was just consequence. They don't see it that way. I don't care how they see it. Richard Whitfield entered the breakfast room, already dressed in golf attire. Morning, gentlemen. Sleep well. Well enough, I said. Thank you for the hospitality. Least I could do. Preston, I wanted you to know, my wife spoke with Simone this morning. And Simone is telling people you've been hiding money from her. That you've been secretly wealthy while making her live on a budget. She's building a narrative where you're the villain who controlled and manipulated her. I sip my coffee. Is that what your wife believes? My wife believes Simone is in damage control mode and will say whatever she thinks will salvage her reputation. She also believes the truth will come out regardless of what Simone says. The truth usually does. Richard studied me for a moment. You're remarkably calm about all this. I've spent 30 years managing crises that could collapse economies. My wife having a public meltdown doesn't register on the same scale. Fair point. He poured himself coffee. For what it's worth, I think you handled last night with remarkable restraint. A lot of men would have made a scene. You just let the facts speak for themselves. Facts are more effective than scenes. Bennett's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, then at me. It's Mom. She's threatening to freeze the joint accounts. She can't. They're structured in a way that requires both signatures for major changes. And the primary accounts aren't joint anyway. She doesn't know that, does she? No. She never asked about the account structures. Just assumed she had equal access to everything. Dad, that's kind of manipulative. No. It's strategic planning. I set up our finances to protect both of us. She chose not to understand the details. Richard excused himself, leaving Bennett and me alone. My son looked at his phone again, then at me. I need to ask you something, he said. And I need you to be completely honest. Go ahead. Did you plan any of this? Not the cufflinks thing, but the larger picture. Did you set Mom up to fail? No. I set myself up to be protected if she ever decided to become a problem. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. I didn't create her lies. I didn't force her to take credit for things she didn't do. I just made sure that when the truth eventually came out, I wouldn't be destroyed in the process. That's still pretty calculated. It's survival, Bennett. In any relationship, you have to protect yourself against worst-case scenarios. I hoped I'd never need those protections, but I built them anyway. And now we see if your mother is willing to face reality or if she's going to fight until there's nothing left to fight for. 3 weeks later, I sat in my attorney's office reviewing documents I'd hoped I'd never need. Divorce papers. Clean, straightforward, with terms that were fair but firm. Simone would get the house in Newton, a lump sum settlement of $2 million, and continued health insurance. I'd keep the investment accounts, the properties she didn't know about, and the offshore structures that had protected my wealth for decades. Bennett had moved into his own apartment in Boston, creating space between himself and the wreckage of his parents' marriage. He'd told Simone he loved her, but couldn't support her narrative. Told her that lying about me meant lying about him, and he wouldn't participate in that anymore. She'd called him a traitor. He'd called her dishonest. They hadn't spoken since. David Fletcher had called me twice, offering consulting opportunities. Apparently, word had gotten out that I was back in circulation, and several firms wanted my analysis on emerging market risks. I politely declined. I was done with that life. But it was good to know the option existed. Richard Whitfield had invited me to join the board of his private equity firm. I'd accepted, not because I needed the position, but because I wanted to do something meaningful with the next phase of my life. And because the irony of Simone losing her social standing while I gained more influence wasn't lost on me. The Brighton Children's Foundation continued operating, but I'd restructured the board. Simone was no longer listed as a founding donor, just a former contributor whose involvement had ended. The foundation's work continued, better funded and better managed than it had been under her nominal leadership. My attorney looked up from the documents. She's going to fight this, Preston. Her lawyer has already sent 3 counterproposals, each one demanding more money and trying to claim half of assets she doesn't even know exist. Let her fight. The prenup is ironclad, and the asset protection structures are legal. She'll get exactly what the agreement stipulates. Nothing more. She's telling people you're financially abusing her. People can check the settlement terms. $2 million plus property isn't abuse. It's more than fair. She also claims you isolated her socially. I didn't isolate her. She isolated herself by building a reputation on lies. When those lies were exposed, people made their own choices about whether to associate with her. The attorney nodded slowly. You've thought this through. I've had 28 years to think it through. I signed the documents, each signature feeling like closing a chapter one should have ended years ago. Not with anger, not with regret, just with clarity. Bennett met me for dinner that evening at a quiet restaurant in Cambridge. He looked tired, but more settled than he had in weeks. Mom's lawyer called me, he said. Wants me to testify that you were controlling and emotionally distant. Are you going to? No, because it's not true. You were distant, yeah, but that's because Mom made it impossible to be anything else. Every time you tried to engage, she either dismissed you or found a way to make it about her. You don't have to defend me, Bennett. I'm not defending you. I'm just stating facts. And I told her lawyer that if they push this, I'll provide documentation of every lie Mom told about her family. The Wharton scholarship, the Goldman interview, the foundation, all of it. That won't make her hate you less. I know, but it'll make me hate myself less. And that matters more. We ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Bennett asked the question I'd been expecting. Do you think she'll ever understand what she did wrong? Probably not. Understanding would require humility, and your mother's built her entire identity on avoiding that. So, she'll just keep being the victim. Most likely. But that's her choice, not our burden. What about you? What's next for Preston Kingsley? I smiled slightly. Work that matters. Relationships that are honest. A life that doesn't require performance. Sounds simple. It is. That's what makes it valuable. Bennett raised his glass. To simple. I raised mine. To honest. We drank, and for the first time in 28 years, I felt like I could breathe. Not because I'd won anything. Not because Simone had lost. But because I'd finally stopped pretending that a marriage built on illusions could ever become real. Some structures are too damaged to repair. You don't fix them. You walk away and build something better. And that's exactly what I intended to do.